Hello, and welcome to another Practical Project Management webinar. Today, our webinar is about making it better. We're going to talk about mostly systems analysis and post-mortems. This is part of our advanced project management series. And as always, I'm going to start with a little bit about me so anyone who's new to this series feels confident that I actually know what I'm talking about. My name is Kim Wasson. My educational background is a bachelor's in computer science from Cal State and a master's in industrial engineering and engineering management from Stanford. I've had positions from line engineer to vice president before I started consulting, and I did that at companies as big as IBM and eBay and as small as brand new startups. I started my consulting business 10 years ago, and my specialties are tailoring solutions. I work particularly in the areas of project and program management, and I coach those areas. I untangle messy projects. I work with process engineering, process improvement. I help folks with time management, and I am extremely experienced with distributed and international teams. And you can find out more about what Ivy Bay offers at our website, www.ivybay.com. Okay, let's dive in. What will we be talking about today? Always good to begin at the beginning with the definition of process improvement, process engineering. We'll talk about post-mortems, whose current name is now retrospectives, but I'm old school and I think post-mortems are a better description. We'll talk about who drives process improvement and how you know when to start improving something. We'll talk about the kinds of adjustments you can make to existing processes. We'll talk about where you research processes and get data for how to improve processes. We'll talk about the process of process improvement. We'll deal a little bit with how your process handles exceptions and what documentation you need, how you roll it out, and we will, as always, walk through examples. And finally, we'll wrap it up with what you need to take away from this. So here we go. The definition of process improvement is identifying and actually implementing ways to make a process more effective or more efficient. And remember, processes need to balance those two things, effectiveness and efficiency. You can get up the ladder first, but if it's against the wrong wall, you've missed something. So you need to make that balance. Process engineering, you will often hear more in a manufacturing sense, but it really is quite applicable to just about anything that has a process, and that's designing processes to meet a set of goals. So we're going to talk first about post-mortems. The newer name that's come about mostly because of agile software processes is retrospectives. I like post-mortems better because I really do feel like these are dissecting things after the fact, and retrospectives make me think of something a little less scientific, a little less hard fact. But a post-mortem meeting is typically held after a project ends or after some big issue has been encountered and resolved. So that's the timing on them. This is the agenda that I always use. It's a little different than other people I know use, but I found it to be the most effective. I start with what went right. What went right on a project is every bit as important as what went wrong. You want to continue to do the things that went well. So starting that off actually starts your meeting, your postmortem, your effort on a more positive note, and it makes people more disposed toward finding solutions for the things that didn't go right. And that's the next item on my agenda, is what could have gone better. Not what went wrong, not who did this thing, but what do we need to improve? And once we identify what we need to improve, we talk a little bit about what has to change to make that happen. That's not necessarily the nitty-gritty details. These meetings are not supposed to go on forever and ever. You take things away, but if everybody already knows what needs to change, then you want to capture all of that. And then you make those improvements. You want to make them soon. You want to make them before the next project comes around, so they're set and they're ready to go. So you assign whatever the next step is to someone who's in the room. You give them that assignment, you give them a date, and then you follow up with them. So you really want to treat the outcome of a postmortem as a project in itself. You want to get these improvements in quickly so you don't repeat past mistakes. If you have a big team, I once was working with a team of 300. You don't want to put 300 people in a room to talk about what went wrong. The best way to do this, there are sub-teams. If you have 300 people, you have sub-teams. So have each one of those sub-teams have their own little postmortem, and have them document the results. This has a couple of results that are really useful. First of all, if there's tension between the teams, it's not brought into a bigger meeting. The sub-teams can get it out by themselves, and you're going to want to instruct whoever is documenting their outcome not to put any of that kind of stuff into the documentation, but it allows people to vent, and that's important. It also ensures that you hear from everyone, that everyone gets a chance to say what they think went well and what they think didn't. And then you have a representative from each of those teams for your final postmortem results. And you have the results of the individual team postmortems available so that everybody can kind of see what's going on there. And once you get that documentation, you can put together a pretty thorough agenda for your bigger postmortem. Okay, moving on to processes. The first thing is something needs to be improved, something needs to be fixed. Who does that? The short answer is everyone. We all have our own small processes, and we can all contribute to larger process improvement. Officially, in many companies, there are process analysts or systems and procedures analysts whose job it is to fix these things, to figure out what's not going well, and often they'll take input from things like postmortems. Project managers have a vested interest in having processes that work well so their projects are successful. Anyone could point out that a process isn't working. That's usually more evident than you would like it to be. But the trick to it is not pointing out that it's bad, it's figuring out, okay, how do we make it better? So how do you know when it's time to improve a process? Well, something went wrong, right? You had an issue that you had to resolve. Or you did a root cause analysis of something, of a risk, of an issue, and the result of that says this has to change. So you already have some of the pre-work done for your process improvement out of the root cause analysis. Or you got a suggestion in postmortem. Or you yourself, you see something that you think could be done better and you work to improve that. Or you get a directive. This is from management, from a government agency, from a finance company, from someone, from your board of directors that says this has got to be fixed, go do it. So you have an existing process. What kinds of adjustments might you make? And this is not an exhaustive list, but it's a great place to start at which pieces to look at. You could change the responsibility for the entire process or responsibility for steps in the process if they're not resting with the right people. You could change the measurements that you're making on the process or initiate some measurements, knowing that measurements drive behavior. We've talked about that in other webinars. You could change the process flow, the steps that happen in the process. You could change what's coming out of the process, what's the end result. You could change what documentation you create from the process or feed into the process. You could change how quickly the process moves through. And you could change the implementation. So maybe your process stays the same and you have different automation, different software that you use to make the process go more smoothly. So those are things that you want to look at. So now let's talk about the process of process improvement. The first thing you want to do is make sure you've clearly identified what process can be improved. Sometimes you have a lot of interrelated processes and you usually don't want to take on everything. Sometimes you do. If you are in a small company that's growing quickly, you may have a series of processes that are very intertwined that you need to pull apart and make cleaner and make more available for growth, make them more accommodating to your rapid expansion. But in general, you don't want to be vague about what it is you're trying to improve. You want to be very specific. And in that process, if there are just particular areas that need to be addressed, make sure that you identify those. The next thing you want to do is you want to document the current process, whatever's happening now. This is for process improvement. If you're creating a process, there's still, if it's something that's currently going on, there may be some ad hoc steps going on, so you still want to look into that. If it's brand new, if you have a new product you're manufacturing, if you have a new department you're setting up, then you don't really have a current process to document, but in many cases you do. And those processes might already have documents. If that's true, that's great. You want to start with that. You want to look at it. You want to understand it. And then you want to look at what's actually happening, because they're not necessarily the same thing. And you want to note any discrepancies. You need to know what the process is supposed to accomplish. What is the goal of the process? And a lot of times you're going to need to talk to the process owner to understand what needs to come out of this thing. You're going to talk to the people involved with the process. So there are a number of different constituencies that you want to address. You want to talk to the people who are using the process. That means they put something in at the beginning and they need something out at the end. You want to talk to the people who own the process to understand what they're seeing and what is not working for them and what doesn't look right for them. You want to talk about the people who are running the process, people who are involved in the process, the ones who execute the steps of the process, to see what they're doing and what they think could be done better. And then you're going to propose improvements. Now, I understand that this is a here the magic occurs step, but after you conduct interviews, you're going to get a lot of suggestions. And particularly if you are not intimately involved with the process, you're probably going to get a big view of things that's going to help you straighten out the flow. And while you're doing that, again, you always want to balance effectiveness and efficiency. So you may propose several different ways to improve things. You may have some alternate paths. You may have more than one proposal that you need your key stakeholders or your process owner to decide amongst, but you're going to make those proposals. Now, you don't just come out with a finished product. You start informally. You talk to the stakeholders, you talk to the folks who are involved with the process, and you say, this is what I'm thinking. And that way you will get better feedback. It's not something that people suddenly feel is set in stone, they can't change, because that creates some resistance, and it keeps you from getting the feedback that you really need to get your process to be the best it can be. So start informally, talk to folks, tell them what you're thinking, incorporate their feedback, and then document the change to the process. Then you're going to roll that documentation out and you're going to get approval for it, right? And then you'll need a rollout plan and a migration plan. Once you have those plans, you just execute them. And then you track the results. Migration usually means that there is going to be some set of stuff in the middle of the process when you do the changeover, or you have data that is stored somewhere that needs to be stored somewhere else that you need to migrate. So that's the migration part of it. The rollout part of it is actually implementing the process. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those things, but let's talk about the research that you're going to do while you are proposing, while you're getting your proposal together. You look into best of breed solutions. If you haven't heard that term, that really is, what are people using successfully? That may be a set process. That may be a piece of software that assists with the process. It may be something physical, some pieces of machinery that help you do that. But look into what are other people using successfully. Look at automation tools and see if they're appropriate. You don't want to automate just to automate. Sometimes a manual process is going to be the most efficient and the easiest. You don't want to do overkill. But if you can automate effectively and with a good ROI, then you definitely want to do it. See, if you're in a large organization, see what other groups in your company are doing. Maybe somebody's already solved this problem successfully in your company, which means the tools are going to be available, the process is going to be available, you're going to have some support for the rollout. So that's really a best case scenario. Talk to whoever's using the results of the process. See if they're getting what they need. See if it's in a form that they can use. See how happy they are with it. Talk to the people. These are part of the interview process that we talked about. Talk to the people who are executing the current process. And then think about the exceptions. Every process is going to have exceptions. You're going to make these assumptions about what's coming into the process and how it's going to work. And some things are just not going to fit, but are still going to need to go through that process. So you want to think about what likely exceptions are going to happen. And if you have a certain class of exceptions that happen regularly enough to incorporate them into the process, then put that as an alternate path through the process. If this kind of thing is happening, then use this path through, otherwise do the mainstream. But, and I just said that, there will be exceptions that you have not dreamed of that come up. This happens always. This is how the world works. Stuff will come up. The world moves on. Conditions change. People change. Products change. So what you want to do when you get something like that coming through the process where the process doesn't really fit for this thing, you don't want to throw the process out the door. What you actually do is have an exception handling piece of your process that says if it doesn't fit, then decide what you're going to do, get these approvals for it, document what you've done, that kind of this is what you do if it just doesn't fit. So people just don't go off making up their own process, because that's how your process gets destroyed, is that now people are confused about what's really supposed to happen. People start to pick up pieces that they're seeing as part of an exception handling case, and it becomes very muddy, what's really supposed to happen. So make sure that in any process that you're creating or improving, that you have some methodology for handling exceptions. Now, documenting your process. This is both the new documentation and the old documentation. We talked about grab the documentation for the current process. If there isn't any, you want to make it, even if it's only pictures. The process could be completely manual. The process could be ad hoc. Oh, well, I usually call this person. One person might tell you, another person might call somebody different, and those two people might do something a little different, but everything ends up at a third person that's always the same person. I mean, it could be very ad hoc. So you want to get as much information about what's currently happening as you can. Not only is that going to help you build a new process that's effective and efficient, but it's also going to help you understand what you need in your rollout plan and where you're going to need to educate people on the new process. Use what's available. If there's no picture, even if there is a documented process, draw one, because it's going to make it much easier, first of all, to spot anomalies or inefficiencies, and second, it's going to make it easier to explain where the process is changing when you actually do your rollout. Once you've figured out what you'd like your updated process to be, document that. Start with your picture, your flow chart, here's where it goes, and then add a written process once it's approved. The picture is going to help you get your reviews and approvals and feedback. And when you start with that picture, remember I said informal feedback first. That may mean that you draw it on a whiteboard, that you put it on a piece of paper to show people this is where I think we could change. But you're going to want that to be more formal when you have the process finalized. If you need new forms for people to fill out, if you need stuff on a web page, whatever, you want to get those all created. You don't want to try to roll this out until everything is ready. And that may mean if you have new software coming in, that you get that in and configured and ready to go. Make sure you identify what data is needed for this process, what's coming in, what's being stored, what's going out. And then not only do you want a picture of the entire process, but you want to be able to call out what's changed. And this is where the diagrams help a lot. You'll probably also have a written set of changes that you're making to it, but outlining it on a diagram is really effective. So when you roll out a new process, you don't just spring it on people and say, okay, tomorrow we're changing, here it is, good luck. You're not going to get a lot of people actually making the change. You want to give people a chance to absorb it. You want to have some ramp up time. Hold some meetings. Here, these are some of the things you could do. Now, sometimes stuff is on the floor, right? You've got to get a fixed process and you got to get it out now. And so your rollout for that may be a little more abrupt. But in general, have some meetings and tell the people who are affected by the change why you're doing it and what they can expect from the change. And make sure before the meetings and before the changeover that you send notifications. Send them an email, send them a snail mail, whatever people who are going to use the process are going to pay attention to. Make sure you do that. It's happening in a week. Get ready. We're going to do this thing. And announce that date early and often. Make sure that the changes to the process are posted prominently, whether that's on a web page, whether it's in an email, whether it's on a bulletin board or a whiteboard or whatever it's on. Make sure that it's really clear to folks what the changes are so that they can make them. If you can, this is very dependent on what the process is, pilot it first. Do it with a small group, because then you start to find out where some adjustments are needed. You can make the adjustments before a lot of people find that there are some problems with the process. You get some good word of mouth going, right? And you get some advocates for this new process. And make some measurements to figure out whether people are using the process and how well the improvements are working. So if either of those, if people are slow to adopt it, or if the improvements aren't, you're not actually seeing the improvements you expected, you may have to go back and adjust. And that's this last step, is plan an audit. Put it as part of your rollout plan that in a week, 2 weeks, a month, we're going to come back and we're going to look at how well this is working. We're going to talk to people. We're going to see if we need to make any adjustments. Okay? So that's the process of process improvement. And we're going to walk through an example here of bill paying. As always, I try to use examples that don't really have to do with any particular industry. So the idea here is just to follow along, and don't worry about whether this is how you would do it or how you did do it or how you are doing it. This is really just an example. So let's say I've missed a few payments recently on different bills, not because I don't have the money to pay them. They just seem to slip through the cracks, and I usually find them and pay them a few days late. And now I'm getting some finance charges, and it's going to start to affect my credit rating, and it's driving me nuts. So what kinds of adjustments might I make? I might change responsibility. Who's doing it? I might change the steps in my bill paying process. I might change the outcome, because right now the outcome is not good. I want the bills paid on time. And there aren't really artifacts and documentation for this particular one. And I don't know about the time frame. I'm going to have to do some exploring, but it could change. So here's the process as it stands. Identifying the process to be improved, that's bill paying. It needs to be on time. That's the goal. So what's my current process? So I actually have to look at this and understand it. A few bills are being auto-paid, like my mortgage, the ones that don't change. Most of my bills come in the mail. I grab the mail, or my husband does, and we put the bills in a box. We have a desk, we put the bills in a box. And then one of us sits down every few weeks and we write out checks for the bills. And once a month, when my bank statement comes, I record them so that I can balance my checkbook. So this is what it looks like when we draw it out. The bills arrive in the mail. I have an exception here that some bills are just auto-paying. So they come in, we put them in the box. There's a box of bills. We pull them out of the box to pay them every few weeks. And once we pay them, they go into a file box. Once a month, I record them, and then I get them in my Quicken. We're going to say that I'm using Quicken for this. So I have some software where I record them monthly. And then every now and then when I feel about it, I take it out of the file box and into the filing cabinet. So that's pretty much it for my current process. So the purpose of the process is primarily to pay my bills on time. But I also want to know what's coming up. I want to know that I can pay, that I'm paying my bills even if they don't arrive, because creditors don't really care whether you say you didn't get the bill in the mail. I want to check and make sure that they're accurate, that I'm not, that someone hasn't mischarged me, or that I'm not being, I'm not having a fraud attack. I want to keep records of the payments. Those are the purposes of my process. So not a lot in the way of interviews here, but I do need to talk to my husband. So I get some more information when I talk to my husband that I hadn't really expected. He feels that he's helping out by handling the bills occasionally, which means if I think that he's actually sitting down every few weeks and doing it, I'm probably wrong. And he says he doesn't really understand the system of boxes, and usually he's in a hurry, so sometimes he puts things in the wrong box. So with all of this, you give it some thought, and you sit with your husband, you propose some improvements. You'd like to be in the electronic age. The whole thing about the mailbox is not working for you. You want to get your bills electronically where you can, and you want to pay them electronically whenever you can. You want a calendar. You want to know what's due when. So this is to the goal of, I want to know to pay it. I want to go out and check what's due and pay it when it's due, even if it hasn't arrived. And you'd like to actually be able to use Quicken, during the month to figure out what's due and where your money's going and where it's going to go and all that good stuff. And it's really a pain right now, and you'd like it to be less of a pain. And the filing is not fun, and you'd like that to be easier as well. Electronic could be kind of a nice thing. So let's suppose that your spouse, okay, my husband, he's good with this. He says, fine, go for it. You do it. But he's got to know about it, right? Because if I'm sick or traveling, he's got to be able to pick it up and do it. So we're going to get the bills in email. The first time I get one in, I'm going to put it as a reminder. So I'm going to have this calendar that I talked about, and so I'm going to start to record the due dates for these things. And when I get the bill, I highlight it in my email so I don't forget that I have to pay it. Or and I'm going to start this right away with I've got to actually get electronic bills. So I get the bill in email, or I get one of the reminders that I set, and I take a look at the bill. I schedule it through an online bill paying through my bank, and then right away I put it into Quicken. I put a copy of that in a file, an electronic file, and then I back that data up. So this is a pretty straightforward process, but the rollout plan, the setup is a little tricky. So I need to set up a calendar, a family calendar, so that I get these reminders. And then I set up a file structure for the bills. I figure out what those are going to look like on my computer. And I set up a cloud backup for that file structure. I'm also going to set up, KeePass is a password security program. So I'm going to set up something. There are a lot of password security programs, but I'm going to put something on my computer so that if my spouse needs to get in there, he can find out what the password is. And as I get the paper bills, this is my migration here. I'll set up an electronic account. So if I've never gotten into this creditor from an electronic account, I set that up. I set up electronic bill notifications. I set something up on the calendar. And then I set up the billing on my bank's bill payment thing. So you typically have to give it your account information, that kind of stuff. And then I schedule the first payment. And when I schedule the payment, I put that right away into Quicken, so then it's done. On an ongoing basis, as I get the email notifications, I'm going to tag it, highlight it, whatever I'm going to do. I'm going to look at it probably every day. If I miss a day of actually processing them, I'm just going to be able to find the emails that I've tagged or highlighted. So I download an electronic copy of the bill and I put it in that file structure. I look at the bill to make sure that it's all okay. I schedule the payment, I record the payment, and I file the notification email so that I know that I've paid it. And then I mark the reminder complete. So that's a pretty straightforward little process, right? You're talking about 5 minutes a day. You're talking about it being very easy. It's going to pop up on your email where you see it. So that's a good process improvement. What I didn't have here is the follow-up plan. So probably for something like this, you'd want to wait 2 months so you get through 2 cycles and see if this is actually working, and make sure your spouse knows how it works, and make any adjustments that you might need. Other things that weren't addressed in this rollout plan and the migration plan are training, showing my spouse where everything is so that my spouse can find everything. That seems like an important thing. So that's all stuff that you want to be sure that you address. So this is a lot of information. Some of the takeaways here: retrospective or post-mortem meetings identify both the good things, the things that you want to keep, and the not so good things, the things that you need to improve, the things that you need to fix. They're not a finger-pointing session. They're not a gripe session. They are a working session to identify good things and bad things about what's happened. Anyone can propose a process improvement. And to do that, first you need to understand the current process. You have to research, what's going on now, what are other places doing, what's necessary, what's not necessary, what are the goals of the process, who's happy, who's not unhappy. You want to do all of that. And then from all that, you're going to propose changes, and you're going to talk to people about what changes you're going to propose, and you're going to incorporate their feedback. You want to have a rollout plan for any process improvement. Sometimes, if it's a little tiny thing that just you're doing, so you could do process improvement efforts just for something that you do. You can make this part of your time management effort. How's my time management process doing? What do I need to tweak? Rollout plan, good thing. Maybe you just are going to dive into it, but maybe you have some other things that you need to take care of. And then you need to evaluate the improvements that you've made. Okay, questions. As always, there's a little bit of a lag, so I'm going to wait a minute and see what we have in the way of questions. Okay, we do have one. The question is, what happens if you make a process improvement and it doesn't improve the process? Things that work well in theory don't always work well in practice. And this is why you want to actually schedule into your plans a review of the process. It may be small adjustments that you need to make, but you may need to make big adjustments. You may need to overhaul it. It may be just that it's not working. Something in it is just, what you thought was going to work organizationally isn't. But then you have all your research already done, and you can start from that point of creating a different process. That may be difficult if you've put a lot of time and effort into a process improvement design, in which case you want to either bring in someone with fresh eyes to help you, or hand it off to someone else if you feel like you're not really able to get past, you're not able to think past what you've already put in place. And that happens, and there's, that's just how people work. It's not really failing, it just is. What would be the failing is to not recognize that you've hit a roadblock and you need somebody else to take a look at it, who can look at it from a different viewpoint. But things don't always work out of the box. You really have to take a look and see, and that's the other place where the measurements come in really handy if you pick the right ones. Sometimes people won't adopt a process just because they don't like change. So you're going to have to distinguish that from the process isn't being adopted because it's not working, or it's too hard, or people don't understand it, and figure out how to do that. Sometimes your adjustment that you have to make is training. Maybe the process is fine, but it's complicated and people are having trouble using it, and you need to set up training sessions and help them through it. Or you want to set up a little video that walks them through it so that they have some help doing it, or whatever might work. So the big trick, if it doesn't seem to be working, is why. And that's what you're going to dig to find out. That's the research part of it that you're going to have to do for this, for the adjustments. Okay, any other questions? Okay, just to remind you, we do have some upcoming webinars. We have the basics. I'm not doing those live right now, but you can get the entire series as recordings, and there is a live Q&A session scheduled for that. Right now, we are for a piece through the advanced concepts, but what's left is we'll talk about systems analysis, we'll talk about traditional techniques, and then we're going to talk about agile methodologies. And all of that information is up on our website. Okay, thank you very much. I hope this helped.